Girivaradari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamuna Thira Vanachari Jamuna Thira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Parivrajacharya Sotara Satashi Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 2 on the Bowery. We're going to hear the memories of, right now, Michael Grant, who later became Mukunda Das Goswami. Mike Grant, he says. Now Mike had been coming to Prabhupada's classes, and he decided to meet Prabhupada alone so that he could ask some questions to Srila Prabhupada. So he went up to his room one day. We had heard about that a few weeks ago. The door was locked downstairs, so he threw some pennies at the window, and from the 4th floor, Prabhupada came all the way down to open up the door, and then ran up the steps, 2 steps at a time, just like a young boy. So Mike remembers. I went up to him afterward. I had the same feeling I'd had on other occasions when I'd been to hear famous people in concerts. I was always interested in going by after concerts to see musicians and singers, just to meet them and see what they were like. Because Mike was a musician. And after the big concerts, they have these huge concerts in America. They fill whole stadiums, like cricket stadiums, and then the musicians are in the front. So being a musician, he wanted to get to know the rock stars. So he would go speak to them afterwards. I had a similar feeling after Swamiji spoke. So I went up and started talking. But the experience was different from the others in that he wasn't in a hurry. He could talk to me, whereas with others, all you could do was get in a few words. They were always more interested in something else. But he was a person who was actually showing some interest in me as a person, and I was so overwhelmed that I ran out of things to say very quickly. I was surprised. Our meeting broke off on the basis of my not having anything further to say. It was just the opposite of so many other experiences, where some performer would be hurrying off to do something else. This time, I was the one who couldn't continue. So in these conversations, these one-on-one conversations that Mike had with Prabhupada, Mike told him about what he had read about Gandhi, and Prabhupada, he refuted that. Prabhupada told him about Subhash Chandra Bose. And then he asked Prabhupada if Prabhupada could give Sanskrit lessons. And Prabhupada wasn't very interested in that. But just because Mike asked for it, he said that on Saturday afternoons he would be able to do it. That went on for some time. And then also, because Mike was a musician and he really liked the kirtans that Prabhupada was leading, Mike told Prabhupada that I have a tambura. So Prabhupada said, yes, bring it. So he brought that for the kirtans also. Now, we're going to hear a little bit, because Satsrup Maharaj, he was from New York City. So he knew New York City quite well. And at the area where Prabhupada lived, he gives a little description of the different vicinities that Prabhupada would visit on his walks. And we had heard at Gopal Krishna Maharaj's Vyasa Puja that when Prabhupada decided that he wanted a lot of temples in Delhi, Prabhupada considered Delhi the most important city in all of Asia, the cultural center of Asia. So I believe it was Tosan Krishna, he was describing that Prabhupada said that Delhi is not actually just one city, but it's many different colonies. And you have all these different colonies, and Prabhupada wanted temples in each of these colonies. So New York being the biggest city in America, it was also made up of different districts. And those districts were such as, there was Chinatown, there was Little Italy, there was Black Harlem, there was Spanish Harlem, and the people who lived in these different areas, they didn't really mix. Thank you. And then there was the places where the rich people lived, an area called Gramercy Park. And then there was the Stock Exchange, the business district, the places where the downtrodden lived. That was where Prabhupada lived, on the Bowery. The places where the young hippies lived. So Prabhupada, he was transcendental to all these differences. He would walk, take his morning walks, as he did everywhere. And according to what he needed, he would go to Chinatown, or he would go to the Asian vegetable market and get the things done that he needed for his daily activities. Prabhupada liked to take walks. From his doorstep at 94 Bowery, he would see directly across the street, there, that's right across the street, the Fulton Hotel, a 5-story flop house. Surrounding him were other lower Manhattan lodging houses, whose tenants wandered the sidewalks from early morning till dark. An occasional flock of pigeons would stir and fly from one rooftop to the next, or descend to the street. Traffic was heavy. The Bowery was part of a truck route to and from Brooklyn by way of the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges. So these flop houses, they would allow the people to come in. They would have to pay 20 cents, which is nothing. It's like 20 paisa here in India. 15 cents if they just wanted a bed, and 20 cents for a room. But they would only let them stay there at night. And then in the morning, at 6 in the morning, they would all get kicked out of the rooms. And therefore, they would just wander in the streets. They would beg. You got some spare change? They would go up to people. They would be able to collect a quarter, a dollar. They would save some of the money for their bed at night, and the rest they would use for drink, to get some sharab. And the different Christian missionaries and the charities, they would hand out free food to these derelicts and drunkards. And that was a type of neighborhood that Prabhupada was living in, unfortunately. So, the Bowery sloped gently downward toward the north, because Manhattan is like a triangle, and the Bowery is on this side, and then from the north you would go up into the other places like where Prabhupada used to live. And Prabhupada could see signboards and a few scraggly Manhattan trees. And the street lights and traffic signals as far up as 4th Street. Because New York, although New York was originally an island that was owned by the American Indians, and when the Dutch came, because there were many different, there were the English who came, and the Spanish who came, the Portuguese, the French. So the Dutch, they came, that's from Netherlands, they came and they bartered with the Indians, and they purchased the island of Manhattan from them. And they set up very exact, like grids, the streets, and then the avenues. So one street, you could see so many, up to 30 streets. One avenue, you could see 30 streets because it was just a straight street on a clear day. As far up to 4th Street. He could see Con Edison. So this is this white building is the Con Edison building. That was where Prabhupada, he was able to get his electricity. We'll hear about that later. Prabhupada was able to get a discount because he said that he had a charitable organization. With his prominent clock tower. And if there were no clouds, the top of the Empire State Building on 34th Street. So at that time, the Empire State Building was the tallest building in all of New York. And you can see here, the city, how practically it was just a concrete jungle. So many skyscrapers, so many people crushed into one little island, the most populated place in the whole world probably. 12 million people just in that one little area. And then the bridges that go to the other sides of there were rivers on both sides, and then the going out of the harbor and then into the ocean, so surrounded by water. He would walk alone in the morning through the Bowery neighborhood. The month of May that year saw more frequent rains than was normal. There's a saying in America, April showers bring May flowers. So the rainy season in America is in April, and then you have the most beautiful month of the year, which is May, before it starts to get hot. But that year, even in May, there was extra rain, and Prabhupada carried an umbrella. Sometimes he walked in the rain. He was not always alone. Sometimes he walked with one of his new friends and talked. Sometimes he shopped. Bitter melon, dal, hing, chickpea flour, and other specialty foods common in Indian vegetarian cuisine were available in Chinatown's nearby markets. This is Chinatown. All the signs are in Chinese. On leaving the loft, he would walk south a few steps to the corner of Bowery and Hester Street. Hester Street was where the Jewish immigrants lived, all clumped together. Turning right on Hester, he would immediately be in Chinatown, where the shops, markets, and even the Manhattan Savings Bank were identified by signs lettered in Chinese. Sometimes he would walk 1 block further south to Canal Street, with its Central Asian food market and many other street-side fruit and vegetable markets. Now, this time in America, it was the 60s, and even because New York being the most cosmopolitan and the biggest city, even the stories coming from New York became movies, became Broadway dramas. There was one very famous one, West Side Story, where the Italians and the Spanish, just like here in India you have different castes, the different jets. So being like a microcosm, New York City, there were all these different gangs of young people, and it would come into the art forms even. Songs about the different groups and the fights between the different gangs and the honor killing, things like that. So all of this was going on in New York City, and Prabhupada, he was able to bring young people from all the different sections and make them into devotees. Because once they became devotees, there were no more segregations that you're from this group, you're from that group. No, they all became devotees, and it was all one family that way. In the early morning, the sidewalks were almost deserted. But as the shops began to open for business, the streets became crowded with local workers, shopkeepers, tourists, and aimless derelicts. I think the sound has gone off, Prabhu. The wine. Okay? Okay. The winding side streets of Chinatown were lined with hundreds of small stores, and parked cars lined both sides of the street. His walks on Hester would sometimes take him into Little Italy. This is Little Italy. Just a minute. Which overlaps Chinatown at Mulberry Street. In this neighborhood, places like Chinese pork products and the Mi Jung Mi supermarket stood alongside Umberto's Clam House and the Puglia restaurant, advertising cappuccino alla Puglia, coffee from Puglia. Now, that is one of the most obnoxious parts of New York City. There's so much meat eating going on there that even if you're riding in a bus, wherever you are, you can smell the burning of pork flesh, chickens, clams, fish. It's just horrible. The whole atmosphere is so contaminated by the meat eating because everything is so close together, and the stench of the different types of animals being cooked in these restaurants come out into the streets. Prabhupada had to tolerate all of that, especially in Chinatown. You would walk down on the roads and you would see roasted ducks hanging and all types of animals hanging that the people, because of their particular tastes, would buy. His walks west of Bowery into Chinatown and Little Italy were mainly for shopping, but he also noted prospective sites for a temple. Chatham Tower on Chatham Square particularly drew his attention. Sometimes he would walk in the opposite direction as far as the East River and Brooklyn Bridge. This is Brooklyn Bridge. When we had the celebration of the 50th anniversary when the ISKCON was incorporated, because our main temple in New York City is in Brooklyn. So from this side, this is Manhattan side, you cross the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's Brooklyn on the other side where our big temple is, on Skirmhorn Avenue. So the devotees had a Maha Sankirtan, and they walked all the way from Brooklyn, across the Brooklyn Bridge to Manhattan to 26 Second Avenue. And they're celebrated when Prabhupada incorporated ISKCON. But when a friend warned him that a sniper means somebody who shoots people for no reason, had been firing at strollers along the river, he stopped going there. So New York City is famous for the dangers walking on the street, especially if you go out at night. Even in broad daylight, there are people waiting in the corners to pick your pockets. I was even once shopping, because I used to teach in a nursery school there, and I just went into a shop and was looking at things, and someone came and grabbed my purse and started to run away with it, and I was yelling, "Stop her, stop her!" And she turned around and said, "You stole my purse. I'm taking my purse back." And there was, this is how they live, because there are so many people all crammed together like that. And it was a very frightening, I had no money to get home, nothing. Very frightening. And then I would meet people who had been mugged. Mugged means when they punch you in the face and their eyes are all, everything in their face gets broken. And it's a very common affair in New York City. It's a very frightening place. So but Prabhupada was completely transcendental. Nothing ever happened to him. Despite the bad neighborhood where Prabhupada lived and walked, he was rarely disturbed. Often he would find several Bowery bums asleep or unconscious at his door, and he would have to step over them. Sometimes a drunk, simply out of his inability to maneuver, would bump into him, or a derelict would mutter something unintelligible or laugh at him. The more sober ones would stand and gesture courteously, ushering the Swami into or out of his door at 94 Bowery. He would pass among them, acknowledging their good manners as they cleared his path. Certainly few of the Bowery men and others who saw him on his walks knew much about the small elderly Indian sadhu, dressed in saffron and carrying an umbrella and a brown grocery sack. Sometimes Prabhupada would meet one of his new friends on the street. Jan, who later became Janaki, that's Jamuna's elder sister, Michael Grant's girlfriend, met him on several occasions as he was out walking. Jan remembers, "I would see him in the midst of this potpourri of people down there, walking down the street. He always had an umbrella, and he would always have such a serene look on his face. He would just be taking his afternoon jaunts, walking along, sometimes stepping over the drunks, and I would always get sort of nervous when I would meet him on the sidewalk. He would say, 'Are you chanting?' And I would say, 'Sometimes.' And then he would say, 'That's a good girl.'" So we're going to go back here a little bit, because we've been going through Srila Prabhupada's diary, and now we're up to Friday, June 24th. Today I applied for the post box. So in America they have these massive post offices. And for people who do not have permanent addresses, you can rent a little post box with a number, and you put that number as your address, and your mail will come into that post box, and you have the key, you can pick it up that way. So Prabhupada applied for that because after the unexpected violence shown by Paul, Prabhupada knew that he couldn't live there much longer with him. So therefore he was going to get a post box and try to move out of the Bowery as soon as he could. So today I applied for the post box. One letter posted to Brahmachari Mangal Niloy, deprecating his views that talk of cooperation can be raised only after his coming in the country. In the morning, I saw Mike's loft. Paul appears to be little changed. In the evening, there was meeting, and the attendance is about 12, and the contribution was only $6.40. Book collection was only $1, because some of these young people didn't have much money, and they would pay for Prabhupada's set of three Bhagavatams on installment. So that day he only got $1. One Mr. Grant took one set of books. He desires to pay gradually. In the evening I paid Paul $1 for expenditure. Income $7.40, expenditure $1. Dr. Mishra informed about my tooth sticks. So Prabhupada, he didn't use toothbrush. Prabhupada used, here he would use neem sticks. We would climb up the trees and cut for Prabhupada a neem twig about the size of the finger, about this long, and then we would take a stone and we would crush one side of it to make it into a soft brush for Prabhupada, so he could brush his teeth. So in America you don't have neem trees. They don't exist there, especially in the cold weather. So what Prabhupada would use is, he would use eucalyptus, because in the West Coast they have eucalyptus trees. So I don't know what type of trees Dr. Mishra was getting his danta from, but Dr. Mishra was arranging them for Srila Prabhupada. Now we have a whole week here, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, January, February, March, April, May, June, June. There are only 30 days in June. So the whole last week of June, Prabhupada didn't make any entries. And that's because he was moving. He went to stay with Carl for some time, because he didn't want to be attacked again by Paul Murray. So this is Mukunda, and this is Janaki. Now today Mukunda Goswami sent me his phone number, and hopefully next week he will give the class for us. Yes. So we're going to set that up so that he'll make a video class, and hopefully he'll be telling us about his memories of Prabhupada at the Bowery. So this time I have a little bit out of order, but we'll go to that part. Yes. So it's mentioned here that Mangal Niloy wrote to Prabhupada. And Mangal Niloy, he wanted to come and help Prabhupada, but because he was a disciple of Madhav Maharaj, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, he was afraid to ask permission from his guru, because he felt that his guru would not allow him to go. So he was trying to circumvent his guru's permission and just come to America and then tell his guru that he had come to America. But Prabhupada knew that that was not the correct system. So finally, Prabhupada insisted that he tell his guru, and just as expected, his guru refused him to go. And then Prabhupada wrote back to him that his guru called Srila Prabhupada's attempt to preach in America ludicrous. Ludicrous meaning they had no faith that Prabhupada would have any success in his preaching. Prabhupada already had success, but still they were calling it ludicrous. So Mangal Niloy, he expressed that to Srila Prabhupada in his letter. We don't have his letter, but we have the reply that Prabhupada gave, and this is a portion of that letter. So the controversy is now closed, and there is no need of help from anyone else. We are not always successful in our attempts in preaching work, but such failures are not certainly ludicrous. In the absolute field, Both success and failures are glorious. Even Lord Nityananda pretended to be a failure to convert Jaghai and Madhai in the first attempt. Rather, he was personally injured in such attempt, but that was certainly not ludicrous. The whole thing was transcendental, and it was glorious for all the parties concerned. It is, however, very difficult to raise funds from the Indian residents in America. My followers here are 99% Americans, but Indian government has taken written declaration from me that I shall not collect any funds from the Americans. So unless I do get such permission, I think I will have to return to India, disappointed to live at Vrindavan peacefully for the remaining days of my life. Regarding the Jhansi incident referred to by your Guru Maharaj, they were bringing up, just to further discourage Srila Prabhupada, they were saying that Prabhupada was unsuccessful in Jhansi. He wasn't unsuccessful, it was going towards the success he was going to have later. He established the League of Devotees in Jhansi, and he had a beautiful temple there as well. I may inform you that the donor of the house did not like to hand over the estate to any individual person. I therefore registered a society, the League of Devotees, and I invited your Guru Maharaj to join it as the head man. But he, as he was with the then Kunjada, desired to have the property in the joint name of Helen, and I left the whole scheme. So again, this was the undermining of Prabhupada's godbrothers in his attempts. He wanted to make a society where all the godbrothers worked together, but they wanted to have this in their own personal names, and the person who was turning over that land, that very beautiful temple, was not agreeable to that, so Prabhupada just remained silent. Rather than arguing, he simply remained silent. Let us now forget all these past incidents and go forward with present responsibility. My future activities will now depend on the reply of the Indian Embassy, whom I have asked for permission to raise funds from the American people. On hearing from them, I shall let you know the result. Hope you are well when you are coming back to Calcutta, because at that time Mangal Niloy was in Shillong. So Prabhupada was hoping that he would come to Calcutta. He was still hoping. This was the only one person from India who even considered helping Srila Prabhupada. Now we're going back to reading here. Sitting cross-legged, his back to the shelf with its assortment of potted plants, a whitish chadar wrapped in wide, loose folds across his body, Prabhupada looked grave, almost sorrowful. The picture and an accompanying article appeared in a June issue of the Village Voice. The article read, so Prabhupada was now getting publicity. The young people were noticing Prabhupada, and articles were being written. The Village Voice, the East Village Other, finally the New York Times printed an article that Prabhupada quoted. Then he said, we're now successful. So this was part of the article in the Village Voice. The meeting of the mystical West and practical East comes alive in the curious contrast between A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami and his American disciples. The Swami, a cultivated man of 70 with a distinguished education, is here for a year to preach his gospel of peace, goodwill, nearness to God, and more practically, to raise money for his American church. Like his teachings, the Swami is sensible and direct. His main teaching is that mankind may come closer to God by reciting his holy name. Despite the fact that the Swami came to America to seek out the root of godless materialism, a disease, he said, that has already enveloped India, he is a realistic man. He quotes Prabhupada here. If there is any place on earth with money to build a temple, it is here. The Swami wishes to found in America an international society for Krishna consciousness, which will be open for anyone, including women. The article had been written by Howard Smith. He had first heard of the Swami by a phone call from a contact who had told him of an interesting holy man from India living in a loft in the Bowery. Go there any time, Howard's contact had told him. He's always there. I think you will find it fascinating. I believe he's about to start a major religious movement. So now we have a quote from Howard Smith. So I went down there and went upstairs into this very funky artist's loft. There were carpets all over the place, old and worn out, and a lot of people sitting around in various kinds of hippie garb, plus what I think they must have thought was Indian garb. Most of them were sitting alone around the room, facing the wall, like they had nothing to do with each other. They were sitting cross-legged, and each one seemed to be doing something different. Nobody paid any attention to me when I walked in. I saw shoes lined up, and I thought, maybe I'm supposed to take off my shoes, but nobody said anything to me. So I walked around the edge of the carpet, looking for somebody to pay attention to me. I wondered what was going on, and I didn't want to interrupt anybody, because they all seemed deep in whatever kind of prayers they were doing. In the back of the loft, I noticed a little curtain, an Indian Madras type of curtain, and so I decided I'd peer into that area. I looked in, and there was Swami Bhaktivedanta sitting there cross-legged in saffron garments with the markings on his forehead and nose and his hand in the bead bag. Even though he looked like the real thing, he seemed more approachable, and I said, "Hello," and he looked up. I said, "Swami Bhaktivedanta?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "I am Howard Smith. I was expecting to sit down, so I said, 'Excuse me, I have to take off my shoes.' And he said, 'Why do you want to take off your shoes?' I said, 'I don't know, I saw all the shoes out there.' And he said, 'I didn't ask you to take off your shoes.' I said, 'What are all those people out there doing?' And he said, 'I don't know.' And they don't know what they're doing. I'm trying to teach them, and they seem to be misunderstanding me. They are very confused people." Then we sat and talked, and I liked him a lot right away. I mean, I'd met a lot of other Swamis, and I didn't like them too much. And I don't think it's fair to lump them all together and say, those Swamis in India. Because he was very, very basic. And that's what I seemed to like about him. He not only made me feel at ease, but he seemed very open and honest. Like he asked my advice on things. He was very new in the country. I thought his ideas stood a good chance of taking hold, because he seemed so practical. His head didn't seem in the clouds. He wasn't talking mysticism every third word. I guess that is where his soul was at, but that isn't where his normal conversational consciousness was at. Then he said several people had told him that the voice would be the voice is the Village Voice, it's the newspaper, would be a very good place to be written up and that basically it would reach the kind of people who already perhaps had a leaning or interest in what he was preaching. And I said that I thought he was correct. He asked me if I had read any books or knew anything about Indian culture, and I said no, I didn't really. We talked a little, and he explained to me that he had these books in English that he had already translated in India. And he handed those to me and said, "If you want more background, you can read these." It was obvious to me that I was not talking to some fellow who had just decided that he had seen God and was going to tell people about it. He seemed to be an educated man, much more than myself, actually. And I liked his humbleness. I just plain liked the guy. He explained everything I wanted to know, the significance of what he was wearing, the mark on his forehead, the bead bag, and I liked all his explanations. Everything was very practical. Then he talked about temples all over the world, and he said, "Well, we have got a long way to go, but I am very patient." So people were taking notice of Prabhupada, and there was another newspaper, and that was called the East Village Other. And this also was an article that was written about Srila Prabhupada. And the editor, Peter Leghieri, they just did an interview with him after all these years, and he was remembering Srila Prabhupada. And that article just came in the Dandavats, dandavats.com. So I wanted to share that because it's a little bit ahead, but it gives an idea of how the New Yorkers were responding to Srila Prabhupada's message. The editor-owner of the East Village Other wrote the Save Earth Now article about the Hare Krishna movement in 1966 under the pen name Irving Shushnik. Here's an excerpt from the East Village Other website where he mentions how that article came to be. So this was the editor, and he's saying, "I was the anonymous other, the one editor-owner unknown to the public. I did not party, I did not schmooze with the literati or seek publicity. I had no time for such things. I worked 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, and because of law school," he was also going to school aside from printing the newspaper, "I had to be sober. My friend, the poet John Godfrey, told me that I was afflicted with a Zen curse, a hermit condemned to be surrounded by people and events. That was certainly the case for me in the 1960s. The Swami." Now this is how the article came to be. East Village Others seemed to turn everyone who worked there into a writer or an artist or both. I was no exception and was soon pressed into service creating visuals and writing stories, always using the in-house nom de plume that was his writer's name, Irving Shushnik, invented by Alan Katzman, one of his friends. One day, Bowery took an acid trip and strolled into Tompkins Square Park, where he saw a new East Villager, the Hare Krishna leader, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, dressed in golden robes and sitting in a lotus position under the giant tree that now bears his name. Bowery hurried back to the office in a stop the presses fit and began insisting that we immediately do a story about the holy man he had seen. When Katzman pointed out that everyone was already working on an assignment, John Wilcock interjected, "Peter, you're the only one with any theology. You do it." I refused by pointing out that I was extremely busy and knew nothing about Swamis. The three of them ganged up on me, and very reluctantly, I went off to meet the holy man. I did not like what I wrote and pleaded for time to do a rewrite. The 3 editors turned me down, and the story went to press. It wasn't until some 35 years later that I learned the article is magnificently reproduced in the Hare Krishna's main temple in India. So the main temple that he's talking about is at Chopati. They have a whole diorama of this, about this article. The cover story was transformed into a life-size diorama that includes Walter Bredel's photos. Apparently, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada always credited East Village Other for the great success of his ministry in this world. To the best of my knowledge, the East Village Other is the only newspaper in the history of newspapers to be enshrined in a religious temple. So Srila Prabhupada, even without his attempting, people were being attracted to him with his kirtans and his followers who were informing other people to come and meet Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada had hoped for what the Voice article had referred to as his American church. There was life in his lectures and kirtans, and at least he was acquiring a small, regular following. But from India, there was no hope. He had continued corresponding with Sumati Morarji, his godbrothers, and the Indian central government, but their replies had not been encouraging. In the faith that Padampat Singhania would agree to his plans for a Krishna temple in Manhattan and finance its construction, Prabhupada had petitioned New Delhi to sanction the release of foreign exchange. He had written to the Reserve Bank of India, New Delhi. This is what Prabhupada wrote. I want to establish this cultural center, and for this I wish to get some exchange from India. I think there are good prospects all over the world for propagating the culture of how to love God in these days of forgetfulness. Now, that's the end of the quote. A month later, the Indian bank had advised him to resubmit his request through the Indian embassy in Washington, so that's the letter that we see here, to the finance minister of the Indian central government. Prabhupada had complied, and another month had passed with no word from the government. So this is the letter. Mr. Prakash Shah, Second Secretary, Embassy of India, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Shah, I thank you for your letter number such and such of the 11th instant, and it is understood that I may raise the necessary funds from the residents of America. Would you please send me a list of the Indian residents in America and oblige? I may also inform you that my followers here, who come regularly and enjoy my kirtan and discourses on the Bhagavad Gita, are all citizens of America. Whether I may also raise funds from them, kindly reply this letter per return of post so that I may do the needful. Also note my change of address as above mentioned, because now Prabhupada had his post box. So this is before Srila Prabhupada incorporated ISKCON, and therefore he did not have the facility to ask for donations on behalf of the incorporated society. He was still trying to get his donations by his book sales, and now the embassy has given him permission to collect donations from the Indians who resided in America. That's why Prabhupada asked for the list of the residents, which of course he never got. So, one of his godbrothers had written that Swamiji should come back to India and work personally to get the government's sanction. But Prabhupada didn't want to leave America now. He wrote to Sumati Morarji, I am trying to avoid the journey to India and again coming back. especially for the reason that I am holding at the above address classes thrice a week and training some American youth in the matter of Sankirtan and devotional service to Krishna. Some of them are taking the lessons very sincerely, and in the future they may be very good Vaishnavas according to the rigid standards. So Prabhupada, although he knew that he needed funds, he felt that it was far more important to continue his preaching work in America, and he had faith that Krishna would help him there in America rather than depending on funds coming from India. One day, a curious, unsolicited correspondent wrote to Prabhupada from India. This is when, in the Lilamrita, the appearance of Mangal Niloy Brahmachari comes. But his name is changed in the Lilamrita for the reasons that we explained last week, because Satsvarup Maharaj was warned by several lawyers that we should not use the actual names in the Lilamrita in case they have any objections later, and then they would make a legal case against for using their names. So here, his name was Mukti Brahmachari. That was the name change given in the Lilamrita. Introducing himself as a disciple of one of Prabhupada's godbrothers and reminding Prabhupada of their past slight acquaintance, Mukti wrote of his eagerness to join Prabhupada in America. Certainly, Prabhupada still had hopes for getting assistance from his godbrothers in India. Quote, "This mission is not simply one man's work," unquote. Therefore, he invited Mukti to come to America and asked him to request his guru to cooperate by working personally to secure government sanction for the release of foreign exchange. Mukti wrote back, reaffirming his eagerness, but expressing doubt that his spiritual master would give him permission. Mukti thought he should first come to the United States and then request his spiritual master's help. Prabhupada was annoyed, and he sent an immediate reply. "Is preaching in America my private business?" Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted to construct some temples in foreign countries as preaching centers of the message of Srila Rupa Raghunath. There's a little footnote here. Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami were two leading disciples of Lord Chaitanya in the 16th century. And I am trying to do this in this part of the world. The money is ready and the opportunity is open. If by seeing the finance minister this work can be facilitated, why should we wait because you cannot talk with your Guru Maharaj about cooperation because you are afraid your journey will be cancelled? Please do not think in that way. Take everything as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada's work and try to do the needful. Do not think for a moment that my interest is different from that of your Guru Maharaj. We are executing the will of Srila Prabhupada according to our capacity. A combined effort would have been far better. Mukti submitted the entire proposal before his spiritual master, who, as Mukti predicted, cancelled the trip. Although Mukti's guru was Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, he did not want to be involved, and he doubted that Prabhupada would actually get a donation from Parampad Singhania. So this is the kind of discouragement Prabhupada later wrote to Guru Das. When Guru Das was here in starting our temple before the construction, he was also having problems getting encouragement from his godbrothers to help him. And Prabhupada wrote back to him that I only had compression, depression, and repression from my godbrothers. And still Prabhupada was successful, despite not getting help from them. And now Mukti Brahmachari also doubted. This is what Mukti wrote to Prabhupada. If your program is not bona fide, the approach to a big personality will be a ludicrous one, no doubt. So, obviously, Mukti Brahmachari had been discouraged by his spiritual master, and therefore he's now writing such a preposterous thing to Prabhupada that this is a ludicrous idea to think that you're going to get a big donation. On the same day that Prabhupada received the ludicrous letter, he also received the final blow of non-cooperation from the Indian government. Second Secretary Prakash Shah of the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C. wrote, "Due to existing conditions of foreign exchange stringency, it is not possible for the government of India to accede to your request for release of foreign exchange. You may perhaps like to raise funds from residents in America." So, two doors closed and one very big door opened. That he's not going to be able to get money from India, and he's not going to be able to get permission from the government of India, but you can now ask for donations from the Americans. And that's exactly how Prabhupada was able to build this society. It was confirmed. Prabhupada would have to work without outside help. He would continue alone in New York City. His last letter to Mukti Brahmachari reveals his deep faith and determination, and that's the letter that we just read. If Krishna consciousness were ever to take hold in America, it would have to be without assistance from the Indian government or Indian financiers. Not even a lone Indian brahmachari would join him. Krishna was revealing his plan to Prabhupada in a different way. With the Singhania sanctioned schemes finished and behind him, Prabhupada would turn all his energy toward the young men and women coming to him in his Bowery loft. He wrote to Sumati Morarji, "I am now trying to incorporate one corporation of the local friends and admirers under the name International Society for Krishna Consciousness Incorporated." So we had much more that we wanted to go. All right. There were things here that we didn't get to describe, but next week we'll hear more about this stepping stone now. The doors are closed from India, and now the whole wide world of America and the rest of the nations of the world are open to Srila Prabhupada to start his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai.